We ready?
Yep.
All right, let's go. Trending podcast,
Boom.
round one. Andy
First
Broad.
ever episode.
Yes, here
Brent
we are.
Ingersoll, host with the most.
We got David
Trending.
Gameforth here as well, sitting here
Yep.
for production
Davey Wonder,
purposes.
like to call him.
Yeah, I could
the
control the
purpose
TV.
of producing.
We want
and
to see something
looking
on YouTube.
handsome,
Oh yeah, that's my number one job. That's why you brought me up
looking
here.
like Tom Brady over
Yes.
here. I think he's the Tom Brady doppelganger of King's Church.
Yeah,
Listen,
I
man,
can
if I
throw
look
him
like
in
anybody, I
football.
look like Drew Carey. So Tom Brady is better, is better than Drew Carey.
I was once
Go that
told, a
way.
guy came up to me at the end of church service once and said, "You look like the guy." Anybody ever tell you look like the guy that died on the boat there?
On the boat.
On the boat, died on the boat. And
What
I
boat?
pressed back and said, "The guy that died on the boat there." He's like, "Yeah, you know, on the movie
That's
there,
not helpful
the,
at all.
the Titanic." And I'm like,
Oh,
"Oh,
my
okay,
goodness.
yeah. I think
Seriously?
he's
Wow.
the guy that died on the boat there."
So you were supposed to.
That was a
You were
loose
supposed to
DiCaprio
apply Leonardo
reference.
DiCaprio to the guy who died in the boat.
But
Nice.
like,
Yeah.
but at that age of when he died on the
Still,
boat,
though.
like, so you're a 20-year-old.
Maybe, I don't know. He's like, "Anybody ever tell you look like that?" So, well, welcome to the Trending Podcast, guys. This is going to be
Carey.
fun. I got.
It is, man. I'm pumped
We've
for
got,
this. I'm excited.
Three of us
To be
We've got
here.
Adam's kicking around in the room somewhere. We've got AJ on some
Surrounds.
cameras, and we have a live.
There's a lot of magic in this room.
We
right
have
now.
a studio
lot of magic
audience as well. Did you know?
happening. We do. Hey, yes. I love it. Oh, man.
Of course.
Our audience is going to be
Oh,
clapping a lot
Oh yes.
tonight. I have a feeling. So much. Listen, they're ready.
I saw John Mayer do this.
That's so good.
Oh, thunderous!
Oh, man.
thunderous applause! And watch this
Thunderous.
when you get rid of it, it
That just sounds like white
stop.
noise.
They won't stop. They just
Yeah, I mean,
and then
They want an
Stand up.
encore.
and then.
I need that app.
Yeah, it's a great app.
Is it a free app?
Yeah, I saw
Paid app?
John Mayer on his Instagram.
Okay.
He's got an Instagram show.
old
And
John
anyway,
Mayer.
he had that going, so I totally ripped that off.
Now we have an Instagram show.
Yeah,
Yes.
which we're excited
much.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
actually
this
AJ
is
and
going to
Adam
be a
clapping
really
background.
long podcast if we don't jump into it.
It is gonna be.
So
That's what it
we
is gonna
should
be.
get going.
So what are we actually doing here, Brent? Tell us what we're actually doing. So this is a trending podcast. We've been talking about this a little bit in our services, but
Yep.
what's the heart behind this? Why are we here? Why did we start this trending podcast in the first place?
So we are doing a series called Trending at the church, and we are
2 weeks in.
Yeah, and we're tackling some major issues, some complex issues
Yep.
that are nuanced and heavy and weighty and complicated. And I'm doing my best in what are long sermons. They've all been like 50 minutes or an hour.
Yep.
And even that's not
Yeah.
even been. Come on, man.
I'm not editing those.
Listen,
They're an
you
hour.
try and tiptoe through the minefield of gender dynamics in less than an hour. See how you do.
50 minutes sounds like a long time.
Yeah.
When you're talking about gender
This thing
dynamics,
just went down.
50 minutes is not long enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, right?
No,
No,
we lost signal back
not
there.
even close. Oh, no.
So there we go.
We're
So as you can see, our production is really casual with
Man.
the Trending Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
We're not trying to win any awards here,
It's
but
legit. I like it.
yeah, we're having fun. And so the reason we're doing this is because we need to just have a little more conversation, a little more just space to have dialogue.
Right.
You know, with some of the things I've said, I'm really just trying to give just biblical and Christian framework for us to even begin to start thinking about some of these things, which probably creates more questions than it even brings answers for a lot of people.
Right.
Might have answered some questions, but probably a lot of people went home with even more questions than they had in the first place.
Absolutely.
So that's really the reason for just doing this, is just to have some dialogue. And so today, you know, me and you and me, the three of us, going to jump in on a few of these topics. You know, we're by no means experts, but we can.
I'm
at
an
least,
expert.
You are perfect.
I am an expert.
Perfect.
Certified. No,
So-
I'm not. No.
So, well, we'll take a stab at some of these. For you know what I found with a lot of questions that come from our people, especially at the church. For a lot of their questions, there are great answers. Like there are great questions that have great answers. For a lot of things in the faith, though, you know, there's difficult answers and tricky answers, and sometimes there's not great answers. Sometimes it's just mystery, or you shrug your shoulders and say, I don't know, God's God and I'm not. And so with all that, we'll do our best to try to, if we have something to say about a topic, we'll try to drive in.
I like that though, because when it comes to our faith, I think there's sometimes more answers than we think.
I think so, yeah.
We think sometimes a lot of these questions that don't have answers, but actually you really dive deep into the Bible and what's got to say, there's probably more answers there than we think.
Yeah, for
some of the stuff. So
there's certainly like a lot of like logic and reason, attached to the Christian faith. Like Christianity satisfied some of the most brilliant minds in human history. So, we don't need to shy away from having intellectual discussion or biblical discussion, especially. But sometimes there's just not great answers. But let's dive in. Awesome. I mean,
let's do it.
We started in, and basically the reason I wanted to do this series in the first place was because we live in a very unique time, and a time where, the culture is probably more volatile. The culture we live in the West, more volatile and more, I don't know what the word is, hyperactive and more boisterous. Is that a word? Than ever before, and I think it's more
opinionated, maybe.
It's
on
hyper opinionated, on edge. Everybody's got a protest, and everything's 10 out of 10. Everything's like Amber Alert, like it's just super intense, which
high offense, like really easy.
Oh my goodness,
offend someone, or
which is what it is. But at the same time, we as Christians we're naive to think we're not being influenced by that, and especially for a lot of new Christians that we have, I felt it was really important so that we didn't, late in the game, bring information forward about like things that are really core to what we believe. I didn't want to just leave these things untouched and untalked about. So I felt like it was an important time for our community to have some family conversation. And so really that's what this has been about. We've had a lot of new believers and a lot of people who are new to the faith. And so that's really why we did this. And really, I mean, it's a big...
Well, I mean, everyone's having the conversation anyway. It's just if we don't have it at the church, it's like as soon as they walk out and they hang out with their friends or they go home with their family, it's happening. So we might as well talk about it here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our faith... It should inform our entire world. Like this is not just some, like ideology that affects certain parts of us. Like it's an entirely different worldview, and so we should have different ways of looking at everything. So
it's healthy for us to dialogue and to talk about these things. Like,
let's do it.
I like that you were saying like we're not going to be afraid or shy away from things like this. Like we're going to take it head on, and we're going to talk about it and really try and figure it out.
For sure. So we asked our people to fire some questions in. We got a few questions in, both through the website and then just through, chatter, people I've talked to, people that have been talking surrounding. So, we talked 2 weeks ago, we jumped in with the conversation about identity and gender, and that we thought we'd start off with a warm up,
super easy, super simple, laid back.
But the reason I wanted to start with identity is because that's really at the core of the gospel. And I felt like it was creeping into the church a lot. I was noticing in language that people maybe weren't understanding that to be Christian is to actually resign your opinion ultimately and allow Jesus to inform it, inform your life more than anything or anyone. Yeah. And I think there's some people that don't quite maybe understand that Christianity is this thing that kind of comes in to augment my life and to help me. But it's way more than that. It's this kind of call to die. And so I was kind of getting a little nervous about just some of the language I was hearing and people maybe not having a space for just the authority of God's word in their life. Yeah. So biblical authority is a big reason why we did this series in the first place. So
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I mean, we got some questions in. Yeah,
I mean, we want to jump in and start with the first question that if anybody was here at our service this past weekend, you actually read that someone had sent in basically this question, and they'd heard the sermon and they were sort of wrestling with this thought, but someone that was actually here with their nephew essentially, and that like they were kind of left both sort of confused, and like she wound up saying to her nephew that like I think that God has sort of changed his mind over the years, kind of like God understands that the times have changed, I think is what it was, right? Yeah. And that he's like kind of evolved with it. He understands that things are maybe different now than they were back then, so that's why conversations around identity and gender and homosexuality, like things like that may have changed or may have shifted, right?
Yeah.
And your perspective, I think, on that was really, really good, because it was like, well, actually, no, God doesn't change at all, right? Like he doesn't, like the Bible actually tells us that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So some of those conversations that we're having, like it's easy for us as people to say that, well, God understands that culture has shifted and that people have changed and our opinions have changed. So he's okay with that. He's cool that he changes with us, right? And what we're saying is actually the exact opposite of that, right?
Yep.
What you're saying, like that's the idea of biblical authority, is that like we're talking about submitting ourselves to the Bible, to the Word of God. Like if we believe that it's living and it's active, and like that's the source from which everything that we operate, everything that we say and do should really exist and come from, that we've got to actually surrender ourselves and bring ourselves in line with that, rather than expecting it to evolve with us. Is that
100%?
Yeah,
like if I think the thing I would push back to on some people who really have a hard time thinking about faith in those terms, that they want it to be a little more fluid, like that God's going to adapt for them,
right?
But really, when you think about it, if you're God and this God that you have in your mind that all of a sudden is changing his opinion, really that's what this lady is saying, that God somewhere revised his opinion on how he designed things or what he said.
Right. And she's not the only one who has said that.
No, lots of people. This is a great example. We're not picking on her at all.
High-profile Christian pastors,
totally,
Christian authors. Like
I mean, Rob Bell, like 3 years ago, I think he was pressed. He was in a very setting like this. I saw the interview, and a guy was asking him, a biblical scholar was asking him, like biblically, like your stance on gay marriage, like you've changed your stance. So do you think God has changed? And he kind of ducked the question and said, I just think that it's time that we, get with the times. Is essentially what he said.
Right.
I mean, it can be it's a valid question in the sense of like where it's coming from, because you look at our culture and it almost seems like Christianity has changed. When you look at slavery, you look at women's rights, it's like, man, things have changed. What we used to be isn't today, but it's like more of our understanding of God is changing. We're changing. God has stayed the same. Like you go back in the Bible, slavery and women's rights, like it does address that stuff, right? And it's not, it wasn't condoning it either. So people can get confused, I think, when they start talking about this.
And that's actually, David, you're on like the number one argument that, people are trying to make a biblical case for gay marriage. We're kind of getting ahead, but let's go there. We don't need to stick to a plan, but the biblical case, the biblical case, though, that a lot of people make, the ones that are trying to argue from the Bible most aggressively, is, that exact thing. Well, there was a time when Christians used the Bible to oppress women. There was a time where Christians used the Bible to back up having people as property. And we changed our stance on that. So why can't we change our stance on homosexuality? And the general consensus, though, in the biblical, scholarship, theological community is that using the Bible to, promote slavery actually goes against the whole ethic of the Bible from beginning to end. The Bible is about creation and abounding in freedom. And you actually see slavery come in Genesis 3 with sin. They become slaves to sin. You see it come in again in Exodus, where like Pharaoh is imprisoning the Israelites. And you see it again in Babylon. Slavery is this oppressive theme that God keeps breaking. And you see the same thing with women as well. You see Jesus women were the ones that he was establishing. Like it was women that found the empty tomb. There was this over and over, like there was this thrust in the whole Bible,
even in his lineage.
He was through like Rahab and absolutely
crazy.
And so like there's common threads, and there's a theological term for, not theological, but like a scholarly term called hermeneutic. And what that means is
great word.
It's a great word. Hermeneutic.
I took a whole class on hermeneutics.
Biblical hermeneutics basically means is what is the Bible saying as a whole?
Okay.
Right.
Like, so you have isolated verses, but how does that fit into what the Bible is saying as a whole? And if you look at what the Bible is saying as a whole on the homosexuality piece, you've got from beginning to end this picture of male, female as marriage, these binaries that come together, that God knitted the fabric of creation together with. You see it in Genesis 1, Genesis 2. You see it all the way in Revelation 21 and 22 with the new heaven and new earth, the bride and the groom and the wedding supper of the Lamb, this whole imagery of marriage being male and female. And then you have individual verses that also back that up multiple times in the New Testament and a bunch of times in the Old Testament. So, but that's
an education for me.
Yeah,
so,
but exactly. There's a good answer for that, but that's a fair question because when at a glance you're like, well, if we changed our opinion on this, then why can't we change our opinion on that? And that's totally a fair question.
Yeah. But
it comes back to the bigger thing though is, I think what I want to press our church to is, okay, but if we are we having a biblical argument or not? And I think there's a lot of people in the faith that are trying to take the conversation outside of the Bible. Like we've had people already, in our church decide that, this might be the time that they are no longer part of our church. And that's fair. I did this series for that reason. Like, you need to know what we believe. You need to know those things. I don't want to have some bait and switch.
Yep.
The thing that I would push back on people who decide to leave over what I've said, from the pulpit is it doesn't appear like you are leaving because you have a better biblical argument. Like I've openly said, if you can come and show me in the Word of God, I'll change my opinion. I flat out will.
If you can prove it biblically.
Yeah, and that's what biblical authority looks like. And and if I'm uncomfortable with that, that's too bad.
Right.
That's what the Bible says.
Because that would be way easier, for us, right? Like if someone could come to me and biblically prove that it was all right, I would be happy to change my mind because it would make life a lot easier.
Well, it would fit better in the world that we live in.
In our culture, that would be the easier answer, right? But when we're talking submitting to biblical authority, I haven't gone, I know you were saying on the weekend, that I can't get to a place by reading the Bible and interpreting what the Bible is actually saying, from an overarching standpoint, right, of the whole narrative, that's something that God designed and is signed off on and is saying is good and part of His creation. I just can't get there from a biblical standpoint, right? And that's the only reason I stand on it.
Yeah, it's beyond a reach. It's beyond a reach. There are some things biblically, some explanations and stuff that for me are a reach that I can jive with. We don't have time to get into some of those, how to reconcile Old Testament violence. And there's some arguments I've heard that were a reach that I'm like, yeah, okay, I can go there.
Right.
But with this one, it's beyond a reach. You're out on a limb reaching and the limb's cut, it's just not working. But to me, that whole biblical authority piece is the most important conversation we're having out of this whole thing is your faith big enough that, you're able to lay down your opinion and submit it to what the authoritative Word of God says. Right. Yeah. And, for me, that's how I chose to live my life that way about 8 years ago. I was just longer than that. I'm getting old. It was about it's about 12 years ago.
Aren't we all?
I was on a big deconstructionist kick. I was reading a lot of very out there Christian thinkers, highly liberal ones, and it brought me to a place where I completely started doubting the Bible, doubting that I was just looking at it with a bunch of holes and criticism, and I wasn't taking it seriously, and I was kind of holding it out there. If it backed up my opinion, I would use it. If it didn't, then I would ignore it.
Yeah.
And that brought me to a place where my faith was really weak, and I got to a point where I was either gonna be done, or I was gonna say, you know what, I'm gonna humble my intellect and humble myself on the questions I still have, and just choose that I'm gonna accept this and surrender myself to it regardless. And then if I have good answers, good.
Right.
Otherwise, but I've got to submit myself to the.
And I think that's awesome, and I think that's for our viewers, that's a personal journey that every single one of us has to take.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to ask yourself when you're sitting there and something is being said in the trending series that you're uncomfortable with, we're not basing this off of personal opinion. We're basing this off of what the Bible says, right? So if you're like, man, I don't know if I agree with that, or I don't know what I think about that, I think we'd all encourage everybody that's listening, anybody who's watching, anybody who's a part of the series, to put your life up against the Bible, and everybody's got to make that individual choice, right? What do I believe the Bible actually is, right? And will I actually submit myself to it? Do I believe it's the living Word of God, and will I actually submit and build my life off it?
Yeah.
Even if it says something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think to encourage people though that the discomfort you feel about reconciling the Bible to the world that we live in. One, Jesus said that would happen.
Yep.
Right? He said I'm going to be the cornerstone that you build your whole life on, or I'm the capstone that you trip up on.
And I like that you said that on the weekend, because when I'm sitting back listening to you, put myself in the shoes of maybe a mom or a dad or a sister or a brother or whatever that actually has someone who's going through this, and it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I don't have the theology to argue. They come up and have a biblical argument with me,
right.
But what does this mean for my family? Right?
Yeah.
Like, what does this mean for my kid, or what does this mean for my brother?
I actually talked to a mother this weekend, and she came up to me after the message and said, like my daughter is living this right now. And I said, we all need, to her, I was like, we all need to be so careful, when we're having these kinds of conversations. It's really easy if you're not living it to sort of stand in judgment or point a finger or whatever, right? Or to form an opinion of it, let's say. Yeah. But when you know someone who's going through it, you've really got to decide and choose, again, that biblical authority conversation comes up, right?
Because what does it mean?
Right.
What do you do next?
Yeah.
I think that's what you walk away feeling like. Maybe if you're a family member, it's like, okay, it's not even that. Maybe I don't even disagree with you, Brent.
Right.
What's
you just
next?
Feel helpless, kind of like.
Well, what do we do?
Yeah. Because their love for them is so strong, right?
Yeah.
And it's so easy that if you don't know someone who's going through it, you're like, well, I don't want to have a dog in this fight or whatever.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
when you love someone that deeply and you see them going through it, or
and you want them to be
standing
happy.
by that, right? And you want them to be happy, and they're saying can't you just be happy for me?
Right.
And you're, as a parent, looking at that that is that's the real deal.
It's tough for sure. There's no way around it. And that's some of the stuff Jesus was even talking about. This is going to complicate your family relationships. He flat out said that. Yeah. He said brothers will turn on brothers and parents will turn on kids will turn on parents, and he talked about that and he said it's going to happen. I think back to the biblical authority piece, and we need to move on. I'll bring out the applause in a second, but I think it is a little, just pull back out of the subjectivity of your own feelings for a second and think about it in terms of existentially. If there is a God and there is a heaven, it's a little delusional to assume that God's thinking, a higher being, God's reality, a higher world, and God's laws are going to just fit nice and neat and tidy with how we think things should be. And I think it's delusional that we think that God would be that small, that we could pull him down to our level and be like, okay, you understand how the times are now, God. You're more comfortable with our world. Yeah. Right? That whole idea of our world. You know,
sort of get with our program here.
Which would you understand? That's right at the heart of where this whole religion of Christianity is built on, about whose world is this, and who is God. And so I think it's just super important to even talk about these things, but especially on the whole idea of identity. So identity and gender. Let's have let's have a little conversation. Shoot.
Thanks.
There's the raucous applause.
Thanks for that clapping, Eddie. Wait for it. Kill it. Oh.
You can't. You have to wait it out.
Oh man.
That's a standing O.
It's a standing O. I don't think our answers were that good, but
all right.
But identity and gender. So we got a few conversations, some questions that came in.
There's one here. This is a big one. I think probably a good one for us to jump in, in an introduction standpoint. But how are we as Christians to understand the gender fluidity conversation?
Right.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Right. So gender is no longer how I was born and what I was assigned at my birth. It's what I identify as. Right. Yeah. So maybe I decide that I want to be a different gender, or I want to be
Yeah.
Anybody can be whatever they want to be today.
Yeah,
you were saying this in your message. How many different options are there for genders on Facebook? I think
there's 70 something.
Right.
When I checked last.
70.
Right.
Yeah, but they keep.
So it's almost like, and this is not making fun of anything at all, but it's almost as fast as we can think of something, we can be that, because everything's self-assignment.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you track the logic though. If we're really running with this idea that gender is that fluid, then really there's going to have to be how many billion people are there? 7 billion.
Right.
There's going to have to be gender is going to erode entirely. So
right.
I think the question was, how do we understand gender fluidity? I think one, it is important for us not to be ignorant and not to just write off the whole conversation. These are real people. People have legitimate, they aren't making this up. Gender dysphoria is a real thing. People really do feel in their, whether they're born that way or whether that happened through trauma. I don't know. Like there's data on both those things, and probably both those things are true.
Yep.
But we as Christians just need to listen to them as to, what they're actually feeling. So one is just like, understand in the sense of like, listen, to what's actually going on. I think is pretty important. Yeah. But that doesn't mean though, we need to redefine how we understand gender. Right. And I don't think you can be Christian and understand gender as fluid. I think it's two things. Yeah. Like there's not a spectrum. Like there's no spectrum of maleness and femaleness. Today I think people, it's no think about it. Like today gender is understood as a psychological thing. It's how you think of yourself and express yourself. Christians have always, believe gender to be a physiological thing. Yeah. It's your body. Your body dictates that. Right. So how do we think of gender fluidity? My simple answer is we don't think of it as fluid. We think of it as binary. Right. So which is really important. So
right. And again, why we think that, right? Like we don't have to get into that same conversation over again, but reading the scriptures, interpreting the scriptures, like to the best of your ability, like that's what you're going to come up with.
Yeah. Right. I mean, God made maleness and God made femaleness, or God made male and female, not ness. I mean, that's more getting into expression. I think one interesting thing too, when you read the Bible, is that I said this in my sermon, like the Bible actually doesn't really dictate what maleness and femaleness looks like.
Yeah, that was good.
Like it doesn't like
it does male and female.
It does male and female,
like what it means
the
naked
to be. Part, the physiological part, but it doesn't.
The stereotype of carrying an axe over your shoulder.
Totally. Like you don't have to wear
drive a truck.
The lumberjack flannel.
The lumberjack flannel and have a beard. You don't to be. And like I think that's a mistake that Christian families make, maybe even in fear now, like that. I don't want. I want my son to grow up and be a man, right? Like, and I think that you might be pushing him even further in a direction where he rejects that. Right. So I think Christians need to have a broader understanding of what masculinity and femininity actually is. Yeah. So, but I don't think we should be willing to define it based on your feelings or your expressions.
Yep, I think so too. There's another question we had come in, would probably be a really good segue there off of that. But like, someone's got a child, like, and their child is struggling with gender identity issues, and like we know, like we have, like I know families that are going through that, right? Yeah. So what do you do? What is a Bible believing follower of Jesus supposed to do when their kid is struggling with that, right? What's a conversation look like? What's it look like to parent someone through that struggle or that season of their life, if it's a season? Like,
man, I mean,
it's not easy.
No, super heavy, super heavy. I mean, I'm not going through that, and so my opinion, on the one hand, isn't as valuable as maybe as someone who's gone through that and seen victory. Yeah. That said, it can give maybe an objective opinion of from someone from the outside looking in. And if I were in that position, one would be I would be just praying, like the Bible says we war not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities of darkness. Like this, understand that, like the gender thing, as a Christian, I don't see that as a primarily biological issue. I see it as a spiritual, soul level, then emotional, and then biological issue. That's right? Good, like it's hitting, and you see that last even as someone's transitioning, their body catches up, right? They change their body to feel to represent how they actually feel. So to me, getting to the root of what's causing this is not the answer. Is not a lot like just rolling with your expressions. It's interesting actually. In preparing, I didn't read this in the sermon, but the hospital that originated in California, that originated the gender reassignment surgery. I think it's called like gender confirmation now. I don't even think it's called reassignment because that's not politically correct enough. Now it's gender or gender affirming or whatever, because gender is your feeling. But the hospital that created that actually stopped doing that, and one of the doctors actually said, like, that doesn't actually treat gender dysphoria. Like that feeling of that I'm somebody else. I'm in the wrong body. It doesn't treat it. And they actually said that it's similar that to, like, he compared it to treating, treating someone who has anorexia with liposuction. You know, the fact that you're taking some fat off of your body doesn't actually fix the fact that you have a broken mental image of yourself, right?
That's really good. Like, to think about it that way. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's heavy stuff. That's a major statement for sure, because this is very deep, you know, and people feel this deep. But, you know, I think first and foremost, as a believer, I'm seeing this as a spiritual thing. And so as a parent, before I'm even talking to my kid, I'm waging war over them, man. Like, just in their room, in my house, I'm declaring, I'm prophesying, I'm praying over the doorposts, I'm praying over their backpack. Like, I'm going to war, man.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's the best tool that we've got in our arsenal as parents anyway, right? On all issues.
Yeah.
And I love that, because it's not like this issue feels bigger, more extreme than maybe like, hey, my kid's getting like bullied a little bit at school or whatever, or
oh my gosh, yeah,
like he didn't get first place in the basketball tournament this weekend, but like prayer, like this issue in God's eyes isn't any more of a reach than praying for your kid to be, you know, better at basketball.
Yeah, God's able. I mean, like, God's able to, you know, and again, I think there's another conversation, limited. You know, and the church has maybe botched, you know, like automatically jumping to healing on issues, whether it's sexuality or gender identity. You know, like, there was a lot of back in, 20 years ago, the church reacting to homosexuality, and just everybody, we're going to heal you, we're going to heal you, we're going to heal you of
conversion,
that. I think God can heal. Yeah, God can heal anything, but we don't do that when someone has a broken arm. We don't like line them up and say you're going to get healed and guarantee. You know, like, well, no. We're going to pray for it and reach for it and ask for it, but it might not happen, you know? And so
that feeling like I can't be a Christian unless I'm healed of this.
Like, what a mistake that's been for the church. And that's really alienated and cut off a lot of people who don't fit the mold of just stereotypical Christian sexuality and gender. Right. So, but, you know, pray, I would engage them. I would try to draw closer. I think that's another mistake a lot of Christian parents have made is like, especially with older kids, like, that have chosen a lifestyle that they disagree with, they cut them off and they shun them and they push them away. Like, what a dumb thing. Like, you're their father, you're their mother. That never changes, whether they change their name and change their, like, I don't see how that ever can change, right? And I think that's what God demonstrated, prodigal son, right? Like, Jesus told that story of like, I mean, he doesn't color in what the son did and what the son was going through.
No.
But it just says he went a long way from the father's wishes, basically, is what you can write in. And like, there he is waiting for him and runs out to him. You know, I think, man, like, be a mom and dad. Like, at the end of the day, like, okay, if there's these things you're hoping to fix and stuff, but you know what? Same thing. Your kid has a broken part in them or something that's going on that's not this issue. Like, are you gonna push them away?
Yeah, that's good.
You know, so I would definitely.
Yeah, because a lot of these issues, I feel like it's just what culturally we've deemed as a church as are more severe than other issues. It's like, you're not pushing your kid away if they struggle with pornography, but if they're struggling with that, then it's like, oh my goodness, right? It's like both are sin. Yeah. Both need love. Yeah.
Well, like, hopefully we shouldn't be pushing our kids away for any reason.
No,
like,
that's what I'm saying.
God has placed, like, there's no parent like that. God hasn't placed you in your kid's life, right, to be a representative of His love and His grace for them.
I'd say
in
too,
the same way that God's not going to turn His back on me if I screw up tomorrow, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I know that, and I have that assurance, and I think that as a parent, like, we're to be like a model of that love to our kids,
absolutely,
no matter what they're going through.
I can't speak from experience yet, guys.
Right. Well, someday, man. I think though, like, there's not just like that's the requirement, like that's what love requires, but I think that creates the foundation to even be able to have dialogue in the first place. Like, I think the failures I've made as a parent would be like anytime. And again, I've never dealt with anything this big, and I pray that I don't have to.
Absolutely.
But you know, the small things that I've dealt with as my kids are getting older, the things that have really bothered me, or they've done something dumb, or I've been mad at them, or disappointed. You know, my weak reaction is to like kind of smash down on them and explain how dumb their thinking is. Except, I find this with them. I find this in my marriage too. Like, to just jump right to kind of attacking their thinking or their actions. It just creates more walls, and they're not hearing you. Like I found that in my marriage. Like Melanie and I have both done that to one another, where we're just like immediately go to attack mode. What happens when you go to attack mode? Defense comes up.
Oh, right?
Yeah,
it gets bigger.
Totally. So you're making it worse.
Talk to the hand.
So there's probably a healthy level of just like draw close.
Yeah.
And hopefully, Lord willing, they'll actually allow you to speak into that.
Yeah. It's funny how that diffuses stuff too. Like just what you were saying in the marriage. Like if one person is able to just like calm down and then actually just like listen for a second and then say something affirmative of what that person's actually feeling. It's like, oh wait, I don't have to punch you in the face anymore. We can just like actually love each other again, right? But it just takes one person to do it, but you're both just so like, oh.
I forget which marriage book it was I read that the author talked about like the crazy cycle and how when you get in a fight, you just keep basically ping-ponging back and forth. Yeah. You know, your anger and your opinions, and neither one of you are stopping and actually looking at it and
never
listening.
happened to me.
No.
That's never happened to you?
What's your secret, Andy?
Don't talk to my wife.
Just be amazing. Yeah.
Melanie and I
don't
are pretty
ever
convinced.
Ask my wife about this.
Melanie and I are pretty convinced that you and Carrie are two of the greatest humans that have ever lived. So if I could believe it. But so yeah, I mean, I would draw close with the child. Don't freak out. I mean, trust God with it. And then in the event that they do allow you to actually speak into it, I would be ready to torpedo their thinking. Like I would, like there is actual, biblical things to say to it. There's ideological and intellectual things to say to it as to why this is going to be,
in a context where they're genuinely ready to have that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Don't jump
like,
there.
Like, don't hear that. Like, it's like the love first, right? That's the first tier. Yeah. And then if you get the opportunity to have those kinds of like conversations,
you can hit people's emotion first. Like you can hit what they're actually going through, because whatever it is going through is having social effects, right? So it's not just like I'm going through this. It's like, well, what do the kids think of me at school? What does my girlfriend think? What is like? There's all of those. If you can hear the emotion first and address it, you usually are then able to then speak truth. And then people actually like listen. Like you said, like if you just torpedo it right away, it's like, whoa. See it
for sure,
right?
For sure, and it's tough. I don't think there's an easy way. I think God's got to lead you in that.
Oh, absolutely,
for sure. And I think that like something that I would say to parents in this, and something that I work with middle school and high school students a lot, right? In my role here, and it's been almost 10 years now. I'm getting old too.
Yeah, man.
Been it for 10 years now. But
I'm still young.
But like when parents are struggling, and like this issue, other issues, like I've come to like just to give parents the advice to like remind your kid when they're struggling with anything, like whose they are, right? That they're your child no matter what. But they're first and foremost, they're God's child, right? And like that God didn't screw up on them and hasn't turned his back on them and loves them and has an amazing plan for their life, and that they're okay in his eyes, kind of thing, like in his hands and under his umbrella of protection and authority, like that they're good. And like so even in an issue like this, I would say not to affirm that they can do whatever they want, kind of thing, but like that they are God's, and like God had created them and God made them,
just
and
that
like
value.
He is their source of identity, right? And even like it doesn't have to be a debate on whether they're right or wrong in that moment, but still reminding them that they're God's, and like hopefully in that, right, that He's going to be the one who like impresses Himself on their heart and on their minds, and like once they realize that and their eyes are really open to that, like that's a huge game changer. And probably anybody who is struggling with identity on that deep of a level and really trying to figure out who they are is probably also struggling with their identity in God and their relationship with God and what he thinks about them, right? So start there. Remind them of that. Remind them like whose they are really,
and who He says they are.
And that's huge. All right. So, on the gender conversation, we've had a lot of people asking really practical questions like, okay, we believe what you said, that, God made us male and female, but God, all of us are born broken. I mentioned that. And the invitation of the Bible is all of us need to be born again into a new identity. But so how do we live as Christians, and how do we engage this on the ground level, whether it's with people we know or people that we meet, that kind of stuff. So like one person asked, it was actually the janitor at one of our campuses, because they were like listening and asked, well, what if a person is born without any actual distinguishable anatomical or
Identifiers.
genitalia. Yeah, like you're
happens.
actually able to.
That happens.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, like it's intersex is the terminology, or so
Currently, it's changed a bit over the years.
yeah,
Currently
yeah.
intersex.
Yeah, that's currently what it's called. So it's just not distinguishable at birth.
Right.
So what do you do? What do you do with that? Like, how does as a Christian person, maybe you're a parent and
right,
your child is born with that. Like, what do so
what's the response?
Yeah, what is it?
It's a good question. I mean,
Andy.
You want to take this one?
There's a couple different trains of thought on that, I guess. Like, you look at chromosomally. Like, I know that we've had some conversations with doctors that will say, like, you could like DNA would actually have your like double X or your XY chromosome, right?
Right.
And
So XX would be female.
Is female. XY is male. We know that because of the conference.
XY
We're very
conference.
up to date on that.
Oh, yeah.
Which we haven't actually announced to our whole church yet.
We
So
haven't
announced
stay
that.
tuned.
That's true.
Yes.
Men's conference coming up.
It's coming. You get it there. But yeah, like, so like if your chromosomes are reading male or female, that's probably a pretty good indicator. Like,
Yeah.
naturally the way your body is going to be more wired to function, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to make a choice. So you've got a child at some point, like, you almost have to make
Yeah.
a choice. I guess some people would probably say you don't have to, but
So you're saying, like, even if, so I don't have a clear defining, like, orientation of my sex, and you're saying that even in that, my chromosomes are still going to either be XX or XY?
Yeah, they're going to lean one way or the other.
Interesting.
right.
Yeah,
I mean, theoretically, right?
Yeah,
I am not, as we said, we're not experts.
Dr. Broad.
I'm not a physician.
Yeah.
No,
some of the research I did, like
But-
that. So there was that, like if you want to drive deep enough, like, it's not just like a penis or a vagina that like determines your gender. Like, it's
Yeah.
actually in your DNA.
Interesting.
So there's that component. The other thing too is, one of the things I read was, like, a lot of the people, if you Google intersex, like, the statistics you read will say, like, 1 in every 400 people are born this way. Then you read what they're actually defining as intersex. It doesn't. It's like people who are born with indistinguishable, parts, or they feel as though they are, interchangeable.
So that could be
so,
anybody.
which
That
is a
brings
way
whole
broader
other-
wall.
Right.
Like, it's like more like 1 in every 10,000 that's
Right.
born with that. So it's an anomaly. It's not something that's very common. In fact, one doctor was saying, like, here in the St. John region, like, they're not sure they've ever had a case of that.
Right.
Right. So
in
it's
the
not
entire city.
Yeah.
ever.
So it's not like it's a super common thing. And if it's not like it, but hey, when we have these discussions, generally you go to, like, the most difficult question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right?
You go to
But,
the extreme.
So what do you do? I think if I was in those shoes and, like, I was a parent,
yeah.
out of fear of God, I think I would try to find out, what the DNA
Right.
said, and try to, bring my child up in that and speak that onto them. I think to a large degree, a child is asexual for quite a while, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
do, a newborn and stuff, like, is not concerned with boy stuff or girl stuff at that point. I did notice in both my boys and my girls, like, a general and natural, not to say all kids do this, but a general and natural leaning towards boy things. And, like, my boys just,
you notice
liked,
some of those, like, hard wiring issues.
yeah,
almost,
totally.
right?
Like just, and that's not, I don't think all kids are like that. Like, some kids don't fit those molds, but mine did. Like that, my boys like trucks and cars and guns, and
But that goes back to our previous conversation. That's not coming from what their external genitalia is. That's coming
culture.
from their chromosomal,
and
DNA,
but also
makeup.
culture. Like, how much of it's nature versus nurture, and I think that's
Absolutely, because I mean, our culture just defines, like, even what you're saying, as people push back on, like, boy things versus girl things. It's like, well, maybe we as a culture have defined that boys like trucks.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But if in your household, if you're like, boys like poetry.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Maybe they grew up. Yeah.
And there are other cultures that actually, like, that's like, things that we call feminine are actually masculine in other cultures around the world. So all that to say, what I was meaning by that is, if I'm a parent, and I do have a child that's born, intersex or asexual, I think what I'm going to do is before God, try to find out what God intended, knowing that we live in a broken world, and people are born with defects every single day. Some people are born blind. Some people are born without a limb. Some people are born with diseases like that. That's part of living in a fallen world. So I think I try to figure out as best I could.
I'd want to try to figure it
God
out. God
intended, and then live out of the fear and honor of that. Yeah. And then create those cultural things, those cultural norms, right? I think that's what I would do, but I don't think there's an easy answer with that stuff though either. Like, you know, maybe there is a case for that 1 in a million person who maybe they get to choose. I don't know how that works. I think the most important thing is like God gets to speak on this. Yeah. Right? Like at the end of the day, as a Christian, I believe God makes that call on who you are. So, you know, there was that question. Another question I'll lob to you. You get the difficult ones, Andy. Yeah. Another one was, so as a Christian, you have a transgender colleague. Yep. Or a friend or family member. Yep. You know, and they have transitioned. They went from male to female or female to male. As a Christian, what do you call them? Right? Like, do you use their preferred gender pronoun? Right. Like, how do you?
And that's a big issue right now.
Huge issue.
In our culture. Like I think about like Jordan Peterson, right? He is a professor at University in Toronto, and like he got in a bunch of trouble recently because people were saying, "Well, these are our preferred pronouns" or whatever, and he was just saying like, "I don't think that somebody else gets to tell me, decide what language that I have to use," right?
Yeah, I think his big issue too was like with the government flying in and actually, like his big issue on that was a mandate. That the government was threatening like actual legal action if he didn't comply to someone's chosen gender pronoun. Right. Because if you press on him,
a speech issue.
Yeah, I don't think he would have the same beliefs maybe as you and I from a Christian standpoint of, hey, God made us this way or that way. Like I think his big issue was, hey,
but it's more so somebody else controlling what I'm saying in the language that I'm using.
It was a free speech issue for him.
Like. Yeah. But someone that I know asked me like, hey, like start calling me a she instead of a he or a z or a them, which, and I'm like, those are like, there's a ton of different pronouns now, right? Like you look it up, right?
It's just so like a bunch.
If someone asks us to call them by a different pronoun, like, so what's like, again, going back to the biblical authority, right? Like if I believe that, look at someone and say like that God creates us male and female, and somebody asks me to call them something other than that, right? Like if I know for a fact that they were born male and were a male for years and years and years, and we're fine with that, and then now things are shifting in their identity or whatever, I don't think that I could. I don't think that I could, like in good conscience, call them the pronoun that I just knew to be opposite of what their gender truly was, in my belief and my understanding of what that means. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And it wouldn't be from a disrespect thing, because again, take the biblical framework out of my life, I would want to let that person do whatever they want and honor them in that, right? But it would be, again, my decision to look at the Bible and say, I'm surrendering my life to this, and can I in good conscience, bringing that into line with my relationships with other people, say like, well, I'm going to compromise this because I don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings. I mean, I wouldn't love that person any less or respect them any less, but I honestly probably would just try not to use pronouns as much at all to like avoid
to say
to avoid to seeming like I'm intentionally offending them.
Yeah, it's not like you're gonna go out of way to use the pronoun that they don't like.
Right. Yeah. It's not like what you're saying. It would never be like a throwing it in their face kind of thing. Exactly. But at the same time, I wouldn't be comfortable with.
Yeah. There are basically two laws like God gives us. Have no other gods before him, right? Like you honor God ultimately. Like that's priority number one for all Christians is, does this offend God? That's number one. Number two is love your neighbor as yourself, right? Like Jesus said there, these, and everything hangs on these two things. Right. Well, so to love my neighbor, I do want to meet them where they're at. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. So I think for me, I'm going to get their name. Right? Like, what's your name? Like, and even if they've chosen, they've transitioned from male to female, and now they've chosen a female name, I will use their female name and meet them where they're at. Because to me, like, I can do that in good conscience out of respect and care and honor for them, without short circuiting my belief system and how I honor God. to me, a name is arbitrary. That's something that mom and dad gave you. That's something that you choose to call yourself. But so that doesn't infringe on how I'm honoring God.
Right.
But me calling you a gender pronoun that actually goes against what I know God made, that's when it gets complicated for me. And so I got to pump the brakes on doing something that dishonors God.
Yeah, that's good about the name thing, because that raises a completely different question, right? With the pronouns. Let me throw it back to you this way, all right? Like, take it a step further.
Careful now.
Someone has not just saying that I'm now identifying, like, it's a male is now saying that I'm identifying as a female, but they go as far to have the gender confirmation surgery, right? We're saying so they actually go through the process. They do the treatments, right? They have the surgery.
Yep.
They're like, in all like appearance and sense, are now this new gender.
Short of DNA and internal mechanisms, ovaries, test, probably, but generally, they're living the life as a male. They've even done the surgery. Yep.
So what then? What do we... What's our response to them then? You know what I mean? Like, I think does that change the pronoun situation by using the currently assigned pronoun? And I'm not saying I've got an answer to it. I'm just saying, like, this is something that I've thought about and thought through. Right?
Sure.
That's a potential.
Well, take it a step farther. Like to me, why not? Right? Hey, here we are.
These are all real situations.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're all thinking about. So, and whether our answers are great or not, maybe people are going to rip us in the comments. I don't know, but.
I was just already thinking that was a hard question. You're like, let's take it a step further.
Let's take it a step farther in our faith, though. So,
again, third level.
What's that?
Or should that person reverse it? Like, what would you tell them, like, if they asked you?
Right. Do we expect them to have gender confirmation?
Right. So
surgery.
So this is where I was going with the further. Like, so this person say they come to King's Church, and which we have several people who are homosexual. Yeah. And we've had people who are transgender.
Yep.
But
we'll have more.
Absolutely. Yeah. But say they come and they experience Jesus and they get converted and but they've already had the reassignment. Like, what do you tell them to go get unassigned? Like, and that's the stuff.
Or like, what does God tell them to? What would God want them to do?
That's the stuff that honestly, like, here's the only thing, and I would want to get in the into that conversation with them and discern what the Lord is saying and not be afraid to do whatever he says.
Right.
One thing I know about God is, like, I mean, his word is unmoving.
Yeah. On
the one hand, he speaks and it's done and it's always done, and that's how it is. And his truth isn't bending. But then you have this, like, there's the authoritative word. Then you have, like, Jesus, the living word who meets us where we're at.
Yeah.
Right. And I love
grace is big enough to cover us and reach us wherever we're at.
And that's what I got to believe about the gospel. Like, I don't know. Like, and I'm willing to deal, like, God is not afraid of the messiness of that and how it doesn't necessarily fit into nice, neat categories. And I will push on my own discomfort with that and the discomfort that says to the church, and just say, I got to believe in a Jesus and a grace that is deep enough and robust enough that it's good news for anybody where you're at.
Yeah.
And
I think some of these are so complicated that it's like, I don't think you're supposed to have all the answers. It's like, that's why I liked you said that they would discern with God, like seek him in prayer, some of these answers. It's like,
I would want to walk that out, like, as a pastor, though, to help them, what that actually means, what God is saying, and, like, to have the courage to, if he is saying that, or if it is to stand up and face, the difficulty of living this new life and knowing, that, God made me one way, but he accepted me this way, and we're gonna live this way. I take a lot of personal comfort on my own failures and trip ups and shortcomings, and a lot of comfort for everybody else on that line in Psalm 23, where it's like, the Lord is my shepherd, and then it says, his rod and his staff, they comfort me. Like, God is the God of, like, okay, here we are.
Right.
He's like that. Okay, well, here we are, Brent.
Yep.
We're
in the ditch.
I still love you. I'm still for you. I'm still moving with you. I'm moving you forward. I wouldn't have picked this for you. You did this on your own. But here we are. Let's go.
I still love you.
I love that about like that in that analogy. He's the good shepherd, and he's the good shepherd for the person who's made that that physical journey, and he's big enough that we'll figure it out. Right. So I'd want to do that relationally.
Definitely. And that may be a different answer on a case by case basis, right? Too.
Yeah.
Like if someone has gone through something like that. Like, but it comes down to that relational answer and solution, right? That we would come alongside them the same way that Jesus would, right? And put our arms around them.
I think that's why.
And love them and relate to them through it and pray with them through it and try to figure it out together.
Because I think some of these dynamics are so like, just like you have to just, they're so not like necessarily gray, but the questions are so like
nuanced.
That it's like some of these situations you definitely coming aside someone and seeking in prayer.
And I think to help that person submit themselves to God, submit themselves to others is a great sign of just that's what it looks like to follow God. Right? It's like, I guess at the end of the day, you resign your opinion and you submit yourself to what's God saying, what's the community, how's it helping me follow Jesus in my life. So all right, so
what else you got?
Are we good on that? Are we good on the yes?
I don't know.
Identity.
I'm clapping gender. Because I want to move on.
There's a little applause.
Let's do it.
Can we have a little bit of applause for the next topic, which I think we'll all be excited about?
What is it?
Sex. Ooh. It's my favorite topic, David. Shake that iPad.
A raucous applause.
Faster. Where's the big applause for that one?
I couldn't find it.
All right. No one has a problem talking about sex, right? We've never heard of anybody having a problem.
We actually have, Andy. I got some feedback this week. Some great saint from our church just could not believe that a pastor, a man of the cloth, would get up and speak such atrocities from the holy pulpit of God.
Have they had sex?
I suspect at least twice.
At least twice. All right. So there are offspring involved. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But so
it's good.
There's been some discomfort out there that we've talked about this in church. But man, like if we don't talk about
man of the cloth,
it's gonna get talked
Never
about.
Thought of myself as a man of the cloth before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. Like you don't have to look very far to find something that's implying at least sex.
Oh my goodness. It's
not anymore.
Like, nowhere. Like go watch something PG.
Yeah.
And it's there.
I think the big thing we try to establish, like, in the sermon first and foremost was like that, hey, exactly the opposite of what this lady was saying. Like as a Christian, we need to be as Christians the people who say, no, we want to define sex and be the people who are like, no, we believe we have the best sex and we are the most sexually satisfied.
We take full advantage of God's good gifts
because it's within the structure.
Totally. And so obviously sex is a huge topic. I think it does need to be talked about in the church. It does need to be talked about in our families. I think
and needs to be talked about in a positive light.
Totally.
And affirming.
You find, especially in my generation, our generation, because we're getting old.
We've established that too.
Or even like the next one up, like a lot of kids who were brought up, I was brought up in like what was called the holiness movement, right?
Yep.
So again, like, my grandmother, I remember my Uncle Don who works here on the staff. Like I don't imagine she is, but like I think it was my Uncle Don that was saying when my dad, was born, like they just showed up at the house with a baby brother, right? Like it was all hidden,
right?
Like it was so quiet about this idea. I made a joke about, they used to say like, oh, she's in a family way. They wouldn't say she was pregnant.
Haven't heard that one in a while. So
a family way. But like what that created though was it drove sex and the conversation and understanding into the closet, right? And it's like, this is a hidden, quiet thing. Yes, it's a private thing that is done with, and it's an intimate thing. But this isn't a taboo. It's not a secret thing, Like, and
it's not like one hand. It's not like you need to be talking about your sex life openly with all your friends. And within the other sense, you should be able to talk about sex.
Yeah,
within the marriage.
You and I went to Christian college, and you don't have to go to Christian college. I went to a liberal arts college too, and like you see the reaction to being over sheltered.
Yes.
Go to first year university, and you see it. That kid. Like
freedom.
It's not even that. They're overprotected and insulated.
Yeah.
And then they get sent out, and like they've never had to like work through any of this stuff. And then my parents hid this all from me, and now here, let's go for, I'm going to gorge on forbidden fruit. Right. Like that's what happens. So it's like, why as parents and as a body, anyway, I think I'm preaching to the choir other than this, other than this dear old saint.
We're doing ourselves a disservice.
But, you know, we did roll that into talking about sexual design and how, you know, I mean, where the rubber meets the road for what the conversations most of us are having. And we were at this at the front. We probably end off here. It was like, you know, rubber meets the road. You know, most of us have gay friends or family members or people that we work with that we care about.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's a very common thing. Like this is not some just small percentage of people, although it's not as big as what the media would allow you to think it is. It's not 50-50 by any means. Like, however, there are many, many, many people who are homosexuals. So, you know, how do we live as believers? Like we talked about John 8, about how Jesus didn't condemn the woman caught in adultery, but he didn't condone it either. Like, how do we be like Jesus in, you know, engaging, you know, our homosexual friends, colleagues, family members? What does that look like? Like, what does that look like in real time? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's big. I mean, I there's a lot of that's like to not use the same answers over and over, right? But the same approach that we're going to take to someone who is transgender.
It's been a long pod. We're gonna be done in a minute. We're getting draggy here. These are dangerous topics to get tired about.
I need one of your pre-workout mixes.
Yeah, man.
But no, it's the same kind of idea where it's like, no, we are called to love everybody, right? Like at the end of the day, like love is the first and foremost like priority for us, like loving our neighbor. And then in that, it's like, okay, loving you doesn't mean I have to agree with you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the biggest thing. But it also doesn't mean that I need to constantly throw it in your face that I disagree with you, or that I somehow think I'm better than you because I've got a different opinion.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And that's where I think that we've messed it up as a church over the years, right? Is that it's almost like us having it hasn't been a conversation, it's been a condemnation and a talking down to, and saying that someone else, like in order to be a part of us or to be around us or to be accepted by us, a shift has to happen first. Yeah. Right. And I think the opposite is true, where the way the church is supposed to be is like, no, like there's everybody, like you come to Jesus. Yeah. And like in that, once we're aligning ourselves with Jesus, then on a personal level, we start to say like, maybe we're peeling away some, like we've all got junk, right? And we're coming to Jesus, that we're sort of peeling off and peeling away some of those layers. And I think in his mind, in his eyes, again, it's not as big of an issue as we make it sometimes. It's just one of those layers, right? That we've somehow gotten tacked on in our life, that just needs to be sort of peeled away, like one of those things we have to die to in order to surrender our life to him.
I think it's an intimate one for a lot, like your sexual identities. Yes, it's definitely close to your heart. So it's definitely not a small thing. We shouldn't be flippant about it. Yeah. At the same time, the church has really failed in isolating that as like this big, you know, this big deal breaker. And it's like we've hit the homosexual community or the LGBT community with, you know, the prescriptions and the rule book, right? Like, here's what you have to do to be a Christian. Yeah. That's what they've heard. So somehow that's what we've said, or that's what's been communicated. There's been
or I'm not going to heaven. That's one that's been said.
Yeah.
So do you think I'm not going to heaven because I'm gay?
Not at all.
So that's a legitimate. Sorry to derail the questions.
No, I mean, I on the weekend I didn't get a chance to get into it because I had already spent an hour. But you know, I revisited that scripture in Galatians 2:20. It says, "I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the one who died and gave his life up for me." And then the next verse says, "So I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be attained by works, then Christ died for nothing." And what that means, I just quoted that whole thing this time.
That was good, man.
Not bad, eh?
That was pretty good. It's getting late.
It is, but you know what that means is the way that we get into heaven is only through what Jesus did in confessing our belief in him. Yeah. And if you think that, you know, because you're either this or that, or you did this or that, or you didn't do this or that, that somehow changes the bar on your entry or not. you misunderstand. Christ died for nothing. You're setting aside the grace, and now you're having this
devaluing
works conversation again. So the only way to get to heaven is through what Jesus did. Like, there's one answer I don't think it works this way. I think this is Christian mythology, but like, you stand before St. Peter at the pearly gates, right? Like, I don't know where people got that, but
was that Ron Burgundy's voice?
At the pearly gates. No, it's like my Irishman.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. Saint Peter. I always feel like
the Ron
St.
Burgundy
Peter's
on this
at
podcast,
the pearly gates.
Yeah.
At the pearly gates. But if you stand before him and he says, why should I let you into heaven? Like, there's one answer. Because Christ died for me and I stand in him righteous, right? Like, that's it. Period. No, it doesn't matter who you are, what you are. That's it.
Yeah.
And if you say anything else, like, you're going to say, take a walk.
Right.
Right? Like, because your righteousness is filthy rags. So, I mean, anybody can go to heaven. Like who knows, like, this offends people, but like, we don't even know like how Adolf Hitler died, right? Like, we don't even know. Like, maybe in those last moments.
Oh, we're going real trendy right now.
Right. Well, we can go to like conspiracy theories that maybe he's like in Antarctica and like he's building up the Third Reich and he's gonna. But
cryogenically preserve himself.
Is Jesus's grace big enough for the worst of sinners?
Right. Goes back to what we said earlier, right? Like the grace, like there's no length to which we can go where the grace of God can't reach us.
Right. So like, take the worst of sinners, and I'm not lumping people with a different sexual orientation in the worst of sinners. I'm using Hitler as an example to say. The grace of God, if Hitler stands before God someday with all the atrocities what a horrible human being that is. But I mean, if he says, hey, I repent, I'm a sinner and I need grace and I believe in Jesus, he's in. Like, that's that. Like, that's the end of conversation. Like, that's the entry point. Now,
so maybe like a less extreme version would be Paul in the Bible.
Yeah, totally.
Saul.
Well, he's an extreme dude too. That guy's a big jerk.
We're not talking about millions of people. We're talking about
right.
Yeah, but I think some people mistakenly flip that around and say, but then he like planted the church and he did all these really good things. And
so it outweighs it somehow.
Yeah, like there's this balancing act. There's not. In fact, like your worst just always is going to outweigh your bad's outweigh your good.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
that's just the way it works.
Like the Bible says, there's no one righteous, not one. I always get this idea too. I've thought about this, especially with like the sexuality piece. Is like the church has loved to kind of point at that one, and it's like, man, I think before God, we're like a bunch of kids playing in a sandbox and we got mud all over us. And like the Christians are pointing out on the kid who's got this spot of mud.
Right.
All the while not even realizing, dude, you're covered too.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah.
So that's actually a question I got from someone else after the service on the weekend too. Like, is there, like, in God's eyes, like, is there a sliding scale on sin? Like sin. How's homosexuality line up with like gluttony, let's say?
That's the one. So the question of getting into heaven is
through Jesus
Christ alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, grace is twofold though. Like, grace isn't just like getting to heaven when I die, but there's also grace. God wants to infuse your world and your life with grace while you live.
Yeah, and like
he wants to get heaven into you, right? And so that's where the question comes in about, well, what gets God and grace and life into
me right
so
now.
That's where the scale comes from. It's not a question of salvation. It's a question of like flourishing in the here and now. So like, are sins weighted? No, in the sense of, can I go to heaven someday? Yes, in the sense of how destructive is that
right now?
Right?
In my life right now.
Yeah, like some sins are inherently way more destructive than others.
Like if you're killing people, your life is going to be way worse than if you weren't killing people. Like
absolutely.
As the sin in our world, but if you repent of it, you go to heaven.
Yeah.
But your life now sucks.
And you still will have to live with those consequences.
Exactly.
Like, God doesn't necessarily fly in and say, well, he repented, so he's gonna forgive you of your eternal punishment.
Exactly. But you have to live with, I just killed a bunch of people.
Absolutely.
In this lifetime.
And I think there's grace even in that. Like, God's grace is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Like I think
is
the gospel good news for the mass murderer who decided, crap, this really isn't a great like life choice, and I think I need to repent.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Absolutely.
Again, the Bible that I'm living my life on says, like, yeah, it is. Like, it's good news for them too, right?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest revelation thing for me, even preparing these two messages that we've done so far, is like, God really checked me on, like, I did a sermon on homosexuality a few years ago, and I was really busted up at the end of it, because that was the first time I ever had to like sit down and work out, you know, a position on this biblically. And I felt the weight of what I was asking, you know, what I felt the word was demanding of, you know, at a certain point, the homosexual believer.
Right.
It's not demanding the homosexual, it's demanding the homosexual believer.
Yep.
Right. And that's a big difference. But I felt the weight of, you know, we were identifying their cross to bear, right? In that sermon. And I felt the weight of it in that moment, and I was really busted up by it. And I think it was genuine, and I wouldn't change what I said. But I think if there's one thing I've learned since then, and even in prep for this series, would be, I think I might have not had a big enough view of how great the gospel is. Like that's actually, I didn't maybe believe to my core that what I was saying was good news, right? Like, like I was more focused on the death component. And
I related that, man, when you said like that. I think it hit me right between the eyes, and I think it did for a lot of people. Right?
Yeah, like just that.
Because when we're having those conversations with people that we love and that we know, it doesn't feel like good news when we're defending a biblical viewpoint sometimes.
Right, and I think our job is to call people to life through a death.
Right,
but it is to life. Right, it's like, you know, the gospel isn't that Jesus just died. It's that he rose. Like the cross, definitely, and we follow after Jesus. We follow the one who died, and we have to. Like Jesus said, you want to follow me, you take up your cross and follow me. So it's a call to die that you may live. And it's like, man, I've got to start building up in my mind that okay, how come I can believe that Jesus's grace is good news for me, but not for somebody else, right? Like it's got to be big enough for everybody.
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing. Even in living this out, I know we'll wrap up and stuff, but like even in living this out would be my biggest challenge. Would be, as a believer, you know, like don't call somebody who doesn't believe what we believe to our standard, first off. And then you call people to the good news of life. Like you let your light shine before men, that they would see your good deeds and glorify the Father in heaven. Yeah. It's like 1 Peter 2. I wish I could quote it. It's too late at night, but like 1 Peter 2, look it up. Look that up. Look that up. You brought your computer. I'm wanting to say that this whole time.
You want me to
First Peter 2, we can end with this because it's going to work. 1 Peter 2, where it talks about, you know, your aliens. I think it's like verse 4 maybe, where it talks about.
We got the NIV right here.
Oh, look at that. So
blown up.
So go down, keep going. Livingstone, keep going. It's all the way at the bottom actually. There we go. 11. Yeah. So, dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires, wage war against your soul. So he's calling us to live differently. There it is. Live such good lives among the pagans. So that was their terminology for people who don't believe, non-believers.
Yep.
That though they accuse you of doing wrong, so on the one hand, he's saying be prepared that they're going to find your point of view.
They're going to disagree with
and
you.
your lifestyle offensive.
Right.
That though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits. So it says nothing about pointing the finger. It says nothing about teaching them, you know, the right way. It says demonstrate. Like it just says live.
There's no picket signs in that verse.
Zero. Like Westboro Baptist, I don't know what you're doing. Like if you're watching this, cease and desist.
Immediately.
Please stop.
Right. And that's not a joke. That's like that serious.
For real. Please stop. In fact, there are a lot of churches. There's some churches like within a kilometer of where we are right now that I would love to drive through their sign. Just saying.
That's very true.
You can edit this out or you can keep it in. I don't care, but you're not helping. Anyway, but you have to, like he's just saying, like, let your light shine, man. Like, it's like, and it goes back to that, like that dialogue and that trust and that conversation. Like why on earth would we lead with our disagreement?
Right.
Never. Like you lead
Who
with
that
love.
You lead with love.
Yeah, man,
and that's what we were saying back. Well, let's say
with your parents, right?
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Or your marriage or any relationship.
Yeah.
Like
when you start there, you're able to then speak truth and have that conversation without someone just feeling like you're ultimately against them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say, and we'll close off on this. So this came up at our small group last night. My wife and I are hosting a small group. Oh, I wanted to read this actually. I just saw this. Eugene Peterson. Author of The Message and like a bunch of really good books. He died this week.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I mentioned him in my sermon last weekend. But he said this. Here's a quote. I read it today. He said, "And my work is to not fix people. It is to lead people in the worship of God and to lead them in living holy." right? So like, and what that means is like, my job's not like Jesus is the fixer. I'm just pointing people to Jesus, right? And that's my job. But anyway,
that's awesome.
Super awesome. But I think to wrap this whole conversation up, this came up at our small group last night, was like, these conversations about sexuality, like, again, the reason I keep saying it, that this is for us, is because this is for us. Like, this is so we know where we stand and what we believe about design and God and the Word. But this isn't the dialogue you're having with outsiders. This isn't like, you bring love, you bring kindness, you bring gentleness, the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, kindness, patience, gentleness, self-control. That's
the reputation we should have in the streets and in our neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Right?
Like if asked,
we are loving,
if
gracious,
asked,
generous people.
Like Peter says, or I think it's Peter, like, if you're asked, be prepared to give an account. But like, if you're not asked, shut up.
Right.
Like
no one's looking for your opinion. Why are you spewing it
for
everywhere?
sure. Like, I forget where it is. It's
my next Instagram post. If you're not asked, shut up.
Well, go ahead. Yeah. It's in 1 Corinthians. Like, 1 Corinthians is a great book to read on like all the sexuality stuff. Like, this is not new to us.
1 Corinthians 6.
The Corinthians were going crazy, and they didn't understand grace. Like, they were talking about, like, Peter had to talk to them about, like, okay, you've got incest going on in your church, and you're celebrating the grace of God, saying that gives you permission to do this. Okay, we got to talk. Right. That's what that whole letter is. Like, okay, we're going to have a family talk. 1 Corinthians is a family talk. But in there, he like corrects and he says, like, just so you know, like, we're not talking to outsiders here. Like, this is us. This is our community. This is our kingdom values. And anybody's allowed to be part of the kingdom, but we're not putting these values on other people. So I think that's probably where we've gotten things wrong the most. So
yeah, for sure.
So
there we go. Man.
It's been
episode 1 in the bag.
We said it was gonna be long form, man.
Charge that up.
Hey, listen, if you have listened to the end of this marathon,
you've heard every word of this.
If you have, you get 20 Jesus loving bonus points.
Okay. 20 high fives.
Yeah, actually, this is going to treasures in heaven, y'all. That's what that is.
Jewels in the crown. That's what I like to say.
There it is.
Jewels in your heavenly crown.
Also, maybe taking some biblical liberty there. Yeah, but
I don't think that.
Good, all that to say, good on you for making it
trophy case of crowns
clear to the end of the podcast. So we got a couple more coming up. In a couple weeks, we're gonna drop another one. We're gonna be talking about equality and like the culture wars. I don't know if you noticed, but everyone's freaking out about everything.
Everybody wants to fight.
Everyone's got a side.
Everybody's got the correct opinion.
So the question we're going to ask is, whose side are we on? That's going to be fun.
That will be good.
And then we're going to talk about justice, like the SJWs, the social justice warriors out there, and what do we believe about justice and social justice and all that? So it's going to be fun. Yeah. Actually, Pastor Seth's going to preach on that. And we're going to talk about abortion in there. And Seth, Seth's got a real cool story on that. So it's going to be really, really interesting. Yeah. And then we're going to talk about substances. We got another podcast in a few weeks, and I have a couple special guests on. Mike Miller from Nova Church.
Yes,
AJ Thomas from Deep Water.
So good.
So that should be really fun.
Those guys
and
awesome.
We're going to talk to those guys, dialogue about substances, because in case you didn't know, cannabis NB,
baby.
Banking dough.
Super long lines.
Wow. Amazing.
For the gummy bears, I think. I hear the gummy bears are the best seller.
Hey. Yeah, I guess. So we got to talk about that, though. Right?
Cannabis gummy bears.
Because it used to be you can't smoke pot because it's illegal. That's what we said.
Right.
Now it's not illegal. So what's our stance?
Right.
We talk about that. We're going to talk about substances. We're going to talk about technology. That's the other one. And then, we're going to talk about suicide as well.
I love technology.
Yes, Kip Dynamite. Anyway, there's a reference. All right.
That's
a wrap.
Man.
That's a wrap, people.
Good.
This has been fun. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Be great. Can't wait.
All right.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah.
What's it called again? Slow clap?
Slow clap.
I just want it for that.